Ben Riggs presents Reading D&D Aloud. Episode 36, an interview with Sue Weinlein.
Ladies, gentlemen, boys, girls, collected D&D tabletop role-playing game community. I am apparently controversial D&D historian Ben Riggs, and with me is editor and TSR alumna Sue Weinlein. Sue, thank you so much for inviting me into your home.
I'm delighted. It's good to be here. I'm glad you came to talk with me about second edition.
So, what are we going to talk about for second edition?
There's so much, but the thing that I've been thinking about recently is an Al-Qadim source box that I edited. Probably the second thing that I edited at TSR in the 90s. It's called Cities of Bone, written by Steve Kurtz, and it is an exploration of several different necropolises.
Necropoli works for me.
In the land of Zakara, Al-Qadim campaign setting. And I think it's been on my mind a lot because I had the great fortune to go to Egypt this year. And the things that I saw there so often brought what I learned and what I read in this product to mind. And so I thought we could talk a little bit about that. I mean, like, how accurate is game material, like this one in particular, and like, can travel really help, raise the bar for game design?
I mean, Al-Qadim is not the setting I'm most familiar with. Like, I have the core book, and I purchased this in PDF before this conversation. But even the name, it was Zakara, but it's Zakhara, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, again, if that was anglicized Arabic, you would read it as Zahara, which is very close to Sahara, which is, of course, it just means desert in Arabic, but it's, in Egypt, it's what they would call everything outside of Cairo or the cities is just Sahara, and off you go. So I was like, oh, that's cool.
It's fun to take a little ride through these products and look at the names and to see what we can guess the connections are. And some of them, I wish I could talk to the game designer. Back then when you were freelancing as a designer for TSR, that you didn't actually ever get to talk to the editor unless there was a big problem. And this was fabulous. So
he was not in-house. He was an editor?
He was
a freelancer?
Freelance designer. Yeah. And so I never got to meet him. I never got to, tell him how, great. And I wish I could tell him now how great I think this product is after having gone to Egypt and seen a little bit of the research that he put into it to help that whole realism.
Well, and Shannon Appelkline does product histories of a lot of this stuff on Drive-Thru RPG. And when I read that, like, he talked about Steve Kurtz very briefly, but I just assumed it was someone in-house at TSR that I didn't know. But at this point, it does feel like the people at TSR in-house that I don't know would be a small list.
Well, you'll find his name on a number of Al-Qadim products, as well as the Complete Guide to Necromancers.
Very cool. All right, so let's do some reading aloud. Where should we begin in this?
Well,
would you mind reading aloud because I'm recovering from a cold? Is that okay?
I don't mind.
Thank you.
I'm gonna look at the, we'll jump around a little bit, but this is the adventure book. There's a series of 6 adventures. They're not really linked, but they do cover a lot of ground level wise. So it was designed to be a mini campaign. And most of the adventures take you through tombs, necropolis, kind of environments, both in like more of an ancient Egyptian kind of setting and in more of an Arabic sort of setting, more near term.
Well, again, it is one of those, having lived in Egypt for 2 years, like, they will often refer to the ancient Egyptians as like another people, but when you're there, it does feel like a mashup of the two. It's the Arab culture layered on the ancient pharaonic culture with a little bit of Christianity thrown in there because there was a Christian period in Egypt as well. But like that's interesting because it almost seems like this is a based on that description, this might be more like a fantasy modern Egypt than a fantasy ancient Egypt. But again, I don't know yet. We'll see.
There,
It's just the first thing that came to
there
mind.
are the dual cultures you can explore in this adventure series. You know, you can there some of the adventures touch on like the way back ancestors of the people in this area, and some are more the near term groups. So
All right, cool. Let's hear it.
so one of the things that I did first on the trip that I took this year was visit a necropolis called Saqqara, which is not terribly far from Cairo, and it sets you up really great to see the pyramids of Giza because it's almost like this is where they built the prototype pyramids, you know, and they where the pharaohs learned of the Old Kingdom, where they learned how to do pyramids. And so there is a tomb that we saw that I was reminded of when I read this description of the money changers tomb in the first adventure in the book. So it says it talks about how you get to this tomb that you have heard about, and then it says after 1d4 days of searching in the mountains with Abdallah's map, not as accurate as the dwarf claimed it would be, the party discovers an unnatural, cairn-like mound of rubble in a secluded valley. The money changer was buried in an underground crypt hewn into the sandstone of the valley floor. Clearing away the stones from the burial mound, the characters uncover the opening of a rectangular pit, which the burial party had filled with loose rubble and sand. So I'm going to stop right there because there is, in this description of coming upon a virgin tomb that has not been previously discovered, you know, there's one thing in here that really made a lot of sense to me, and there's one thing that makes me go, So, you know, it says you find this unnatural cairn-like mound of rubble in a secluded valley. It doesn't look like anything anymore. I wonder why, you know, I guess they had the map, so they didn't have to make a roll. But if you didn't have the map, I think that there'd be a really big chance you wouldn't even know that you were coming upon anything significant at all. There's no way of telling after all the centuries what might be under there. The thing and then they didn't talk about how you cleared the space. I mean, that's not just, you know, do a strength check and you're in. That's like days and days of work, shoveling and digging through stone and to get into, and like then not getting into the right place and having to move over and start again. I would, and I think somewhere else in the adventures, he does talk about, you know, days of backbreaking labor to get into the tomb. And I think that there's probably a lot right about that.
Did you guys get to the Valley of the Kings?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, like, you know, you walk into the Valley of the Kings, and it's easy to imagine in after the pyramids where it's like a giant sign saying, "Hey, rob me here." You know, the Valley of the Kings, you can imagine walking in there before it was excavated and just seeing like, you know, it looks maybe kind of like a normal valley. And again, I know back in antiquity it was actually guarded and everything, so Egyptologists, please don't email me. But you know,
I didn't know there'd be Egyptologists watching this.
it's we have a remarkably erudite clientele,
Be kind,
listenership.
please.
Again, they generally understand this is a conversation, not a class. And people say they're here for the digressions. At a live event, a guy came with a sign that said, "Here for the digressions."
Oh,
I'm like,
nice.
thank you,
Oh,
fan. But so again, you don't need to feel any pressure about it, I don't think.
No, I will, in fact, love to see, you know, like if people have also had experiences in their travels that reminded them of D&D settings or experiences, I would love to hear more. So,
But you're saying essentially, I think, that the choice of this ends up being a dungeon, right? Um, it's as though Steve Kurtz decided to do something more loyal to the real world, more reflective of what you might find in an actual situation like this than what you might want in just a game where like, okay, make a strength check, you bend some bars, you get in, okay, fine. Instead, it's like rubble, it's been beaten down with age. stuff like that.
I think you're onto something here because there is a fine line, and of course you want to do your research, and there's so much research available on, tombs and necropoli in Egypt that you could just lose yourself in the details and you could like lose sight of the goal, which is to create an entertaining game. So I think he had a fine line to walk here with the creation of this source box. You had to give it enough realistic detail to make you go, oh, I feel like, this is bringing this setting to life, but not so much that you're like, when are we getting to the meat of it, right?
Are you familiar with Beyond the Mountains of Madness from Chaosium?
Yeah, I did play in that.
Did you play the first adventure in that campaign?
I
Or
don't
did
know
the
if
D
it was
so
first adventure or not.
I don't know if this is famously or infamously, but the first adventure is you're making pemmican for the journey. And there's a whole chapter on making pemmican and how you're going to make the pemmican. And again, I read it 25 years ago, although it's stuck, the pemmican making has stuck with me. Then you get to Antarctica and finally weird stuff happens. But that pemmican chapter, like I skipped it. I don't know if you play. I mean, if you don't know what I'm talking about, they probably
I don't
skipped
think
it.
that was covered.
Yeah, because it was really just, you know, uber, I'm going to simulate this historical fact about Antarctic expeditions. And Chaosium is kind of famous for that,
Well,
right?
what is pemmican? What is it?
Pemmican is some sort of a like, man, let's look it up.
Because I have this memory of there being pancakes, like making pancakes for the group of explorers. But we're not talking about pancakes, are we?
So, according to Wikipedia, pemmican is a mixture of tallow, dried meat, and sometimes dried berries. A calorie-rich food, it can be used as a key component in prepared meals or eaten raw. Historically, it was an important part of indigenous cuisine in certain parts of North America, and it is still prepared today. So, my recollection of Beyond the Mountains of Madness was the first session was like, well, there's this pemmican manufacturer who's supposed to give you pemmican, but they have a pemmican problem, and you need to acquire, I think it was tallow and dried berries or something like that.
Oh,
Which, again, when you sign up for Horrors from Beyond Space and Time, I feel like it's a letdown. But again, Chaosium, I know there are some people who are like, I want exacting realism in the 1920s.
well, there's always the danger of falling in love with your research to the point where it's no longer, it's no longer serving the goal of creating entertainment. It's instead become its own goal
Hmm.
to like share your vast knowledge.
But this seemed like it walked a fine line between simulation or inspiration and fun at the table. Because you can just say like, well, you clear it away for days, right? Like it's not like you have to sit there and actually clear it away for days.
Yeah, yeah. I remember on a different trip many years ago, I visited Tikal in Guatemala, one of the major Maya capitals, and it was fascinating how the Earth has reclaimed the pyramids there. Yes, you can go and visit and climb several, of the great monuments there, but there are way more that haven't been unburied yet. And when you look at that thing, again, you'd never know that there was anything there if you didn't have a map that would
Mhm.
take you right to it. And if you were told you got to get in there and you don't have earth moving equipment, I don't know how you would even do it. So in a game, you would, roll a D10, and that would be how many days it would take you and the rest of the party to get through all that, and we move right on. So I think that's interesting how you deal with it.
Very cool.
Let's see. I think that in another adventure in the book, we talk a little bit about a different crypt. And in this case, it's the tomb of Shaddad. And who Shaddad is doesn't matter, really.
Poor
But
Shaddad.
sorry, Guy. But I wanted to mention, because you don't usually think of flooding in this kind of desert region where everything is very arid. But in this case, the portals open into a columned crypt, its floor covered with a thin layer of mud and water that the flash flood forced through the cracked stone doors. The tomb contains the remains of 12 warriors, and so forth. And for the rest of the description of this tomb, you're dealing with the remains of this flood. And I thought that was interesting because on the trip we learned, one of the greatest pharaohs of ancient Egyptian history, Ramses II, Ramses the Great, you can't see his tomb in the Valley of Kings. It's because it was flooded out. It was built in a poor location. It was one of the first tombs, I believe, built there, but it was not located well, and it got flooded out various times, so that now it's not as impressive, and it's too dangerous to go into.
That's really interesting.
So the irony of, Ramses, whose statues you see everywhere, whose monuments, colossus, you see everywhere in the country, you can't go to his tomb because of flooding. So that felt like, a bit of truism. I wouldn't have thought to put
Steve Kurtz really stuck to the research material here. That's impressive.
I feel like he did.
Was that what, so you edited so many things. Like, could you make a guess at how many things you edited at TSR?
At TSR. Not as many at TSR as I did later when I ran Malhavoc Press with my ex-husband.
Yeah.
So I suppose maybe about 18, 20
18, 20. Okay. What made you choose this out of all those things?
Well, again, I think it's because of the trip that I've been thinking of Egypt, and I always like the idea of kind of merging my work life with my holidays. So like I have had, a lot of great vacations over the years, and I often try to go to places that tie in with the kind of work that I do, editing, medieval fantasy. I have gotten to visit, Scotland, Ireland, England, Wales, seen great castles, learned so much that I could bring back to inform the work I did. So I think that's this is one of the projects that I edited that really feels like connected to places you can see on Earth right now.
Interesting. Okay, well, very cool. Okay, go ahead and give us some more then, since you've selected a lot here, which is nice.
So the this next part is, I think, the adventure hook to get you into the adventure. A ghostly horse comes and appears to you and leads you to his tomb. A tomb for a horse. But yes, there were plenty of animals, that were either in tune with their owners or, had their own places of rest. But he writes about this tomb of this horse named Edimu. Edimu leads the party down the Avenue of the Sphinxes. And I'll pause there because there is an Avenue of the Sphinxes in Luxor. So in elder days, the city of Thebes, and this Avenue of the Sphinxes, I don't even know how many, but it goes for like 1.25 miles, and it connects the Temple of Karnak with the Temple of Luxor. And it's just so grand. As you can now walk.
Did you take a car or did you take a horse-drawn carriage?
I didn't walk the whole thing, but I did walk a little bit of it.
Okay.
We visited the two ends of the avenue at different times of the day, but it was, newly excavated in fairly recent years. They had I guess the government had finally been able to buy up all the property that had, been built on top of this ancient highway that connected the two temples. So I thought that was, kind of cool to see that we've got the Avenue of the Sphinxes here. He leads the party to his despoiled crypt near the Plaza of Eternity. Most of the mausoleums and graves are inscribed with epitaphs in Chun, the ancient language of the haunted lands. The runes also cover a few buildings, including the shrines. Those with the ancient languages, non-weapon proficiency, can make out that the verses laud the unknown Nak, Arun, and Merodach for their eternal leadership and protection. Despite the storm along its borders, the city of graves is eerily quiet and seemingly deserted. And then it talks a little bit about, when you get into this tomb, you see that it had been invaded by goblins, and they had left their scratch marks all over
That
things.
poor horse.
I know, he's really upset about this. And he says, okay, leads the party to the mausoleum, whose doors are heavily scratched and slightly ajar. Trackers will notice signs that clawed humanoids entered and exited the tomb in the last 24 hours. Inside, the tomb's horse-sized sarcophagus has been ripped open. Its stone lid lies shattered on the dust-piled floor, which clearly displays the imprints of clawed humanoid feet. Now, I would like to speculate about the ability of a bunch of ghouls. So I think this
Ghouls or goblins?
I thought it was goblins, but here it says ghouls. Goblins would never be able to get that sarcophagus lid off. I mean, maybe if there were 60 of them. I mean, those things are solid, huge, but okay. So if they're ghouls and they have their claws and they can kind of dig it out and dig around and then just push it off, maybe they could.
Well, and the interesting thing to me was I was like, oh, goblins. Like, I had never really considered the presence of like obviously Western infused fantasy tropes brought into Al-Qadim. I was like, I just assumed it was always going to be genies and
Yeah.
whatever you stole from Egyptian mythology. But then when you got to ghouls, I'm like, oh no, that tracks. That's
Yep,
Arabic right
sorry,
there. So
not goblins.
yep.
But I do think that work in Al-Qadim was the first place I ever heard of a lamia.
Really?
I think that's one of the things I learned. And I learned
And that's a vampire. What kind of a vampire is it? Is that it's not the one where it's like a woman's face with tang entrails.
no,
That's a
no,
Penanggalan.
that's the Penang. No, the lamia, I think, is a part woman, part lion, or not necessarily
right.
woman, part person, part human, part lion. Intelligent and vicious, and I think with magical abilities.
I spelled it wrong. Let's see. Female demon or monster who ate children and seduced men. Yep, you're right. That is totally accurate. There's even a poem back from John Keats.
So yes, I think there is a lamia in this somewhere that you may have the good fortune to encounter. So it talked about, the injuries that the goblins, that the ghouls have done to this poor tomb. He takes care to show the party the damaged statue of him in the tomb. And he says, next, Edemu nudges the party over to the defaced frescoes. A stela.
And that's the horse ghost, right? Horse ghost is touring him around.
He's a ghost horse, but they may or may not realize that he's a ghost at this point. So he shows them this stele depicting the horse cavorting in the hills of a fertile island, bearing in the Chan language the label Jazirat al-Sayad. Any character specialized in land-based writing will have heard of that legendary breed of horses from that isle.
And is that the image?
So this is what you're supposed to show the players while they look at this defaced fresco. And it talks a little bit about how this shows important scenes from the life of this horse.
Can I describe briefly for our podcast listeners?
Yes.
So I'm looking at this and I actually think it looks pretty marvelous because it looks Egyptian infused, two-dimensional in the way Egyptian representational art usually was, with again what looks like an Egyptian alphabet. I have no idea if they.
I have been wondering what that says, if anything, if those are actual Egyptian hieroglyphs or just made up.
Yeah, just like I'm sure there's a way to find it out, but I don't want to make people wait while we do it right now. But so if you can read, if any of you can read ancient Egyptian and you want to go look at the City of Bones campaign guide, City of Bone campaigns guide, and look at the back, we would love to know if that is actual Egyptian or just something that whoever made up, Brahm,
Actual
Japanese, forget
Egyptians are horrified by what's being said there.
about
So,
it.
it shows different scenes from the life of this horse. When he came to be owned by his master, a great warrior. In another panel, it shows him being presented with a golden bit and bridle. And the horse then tries to communicate to the party that I need this. The ghoul stole his golden bridle and he needs it back if he ever wants to rest again. But I just liked that we haven't up to now seen or read a lot in here about the paintings on the walls or carvings on the walls of the tombs. Here he talks about frescoes, but everything that we saw was so enormously carved, with depictions of your life and the major milestones of your life, like you see here, but also, depicting your journey to the afterlife and all of the funeral goods that are going to be brought for you. And, even the tomb of someone in Saqqara, the first tomb we visited there was the tomb of a guy named Kagemni. And I don't remember if I think he was a noble because he had a pretty good
Nice
tomb.
tomb.
And our guide talked about how the carvings on the wall taught them a lot about how people lived in the days of the Old Kingdom. And, because you're not going to find libraries full of books on this kind of topic, but just watching how people, what people look like as they're riding in boats, wearing a papyrus based life preserver, how they get the cattle to cross the river when they don't want to go across the river. There's a really neat inscription, and if you look up in Saqqara, if you look up the tomb of Kagemni, I bet you'll see pictures of how these guys in this boat have taken a little calf and they're holding the calf captive in order to lure
Get the cattle up?
other cattle across. They don't want the calf to go along. So I thought that was interesting. And I love the fact that this horse had, his own wall carvings that were, representative of his life.
Well, it's just such a different experience from what you think of when you usually think of a D&D dungeon crawl, right? Like, fantasy is in literature and film so often a vehicle of wonder, and D&D and role-playing games can do that, but it tends to be a harder thing to evoke at the gaming table. But Horse Ghost and Horse Tomb and the wall carvings and the pictures, and like I can just see that evoking wonder in a player, and hope maybe through their character. But I can just see that happening because it's so different. It presents a fascinating problem, but not the same problem as there's 60 goblins. What do we do?
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, typically in role-playing games, I'm much more interested in how are we going to solve this problem, whatever it is, than a combat encounter. It's one of the reasons I kind of like old school games because oftentimes they were like, well, you want to avoid combat because you'll get chewed up, so don't do it. But this clearly, again, I'm gonna have to go. Do you remember the name of this adventure in particular in here?
This adventure is The Shattered
The
Statue.
Shattered Statue. Okay, I'm gonna have to go back and read the whole thing because I'm so interested. Part of me is wondering, so does the horse just act as like a railroad? Is the horse
Yeah, the
just telling
horse-
everything to
The
do?
horse is the adventure hook, I think, to
Huh.
get you to look for this golden bridle and bit. And so you have to track the ghouls to their lair and then, discover what all they have been doing raiding this area. It's also interesting that here's a little map of the area where the horse's tomb is located. And it's this great big plaza. It's called the Plaza of Eternity. And a number of pyramids are there. And if you think about, like, if you look at a map of the pyramids of Giza, you see a lot of similarities here. The idea of, several large pyramids with little satellite pyramids, little minis that are nearby.
And is this City of the Graves? Is that what's going around here? Are these other little graves?
So
Or-
I am not sure, because in one place it calls this city a necropolis, but in another place it talks about going through the city and finding other people, going about their daily work. So
Well, again, to me, this screams, I don't suppose you visited the City of the Dead in Cairo?
no.
So the City of the Dead is at the base of the cliffs. And the garbage pickers live at the top of the cliffs, and that's a separate story. But at the bottom of the cliffs, there is the City of the Dead, which is two gigantic Islamic graveyards.
Are these the graveyards where people have been setting up workshops?
Yes, so that's exactly what I was getting to was about I checked this today because I saw it somewhere in City of Bone when I was glancing through it earlier. I was like, oh, this looks like a reference to City of the Dead. So I did a little research and it says 6,000 people probably live there today. Because when they were built as like these gorgeous tombs where you were going to go and visit your ancestors. And again, they're Islamic, but you would theoretically spend the whole day there, maybe kind of partying at the tomb, and then go home. So they actually are theoretically, there's space in there. You can squat in there. You can
I
live.
understand that recently, like the utility company has had to run electrical power out to the graveyard because, well, there is such a desperate housing shortage in
yeah.
Cairo. It's just growing so fast. Like they build on a whole new Cairo section of town, and everything is sold out before, they can even finish it. So now they're pushing ahead and building another new capital, I think, for the country, and hoping to create more housing. It's just shocking. I know every nation has its challenges, but oh my gosh, to think about what people do, the fact that housing is so hard to find. You're living in somebody's
Tombs? Yeah.
tomb and you're grateful that electricity is being piped in. I guess
Again,
the
this just
owners of the descendants of the dead guy are
sometimes
paying
it's
for
your
that.
tomb, sometimes it's your family tomb, sometimes it's not. And but when you mentioned that, hey, they're crawling through here and there's people living there, I'm like, oh, and it sounds exactly like City of the Dead, and they called it City of the Graves. So I'm gonna have to hunt down Stephen Kurtz because I'm really interested in his research on this. Because again,
Yeah.
it seems like such an amazing marriage of D&D, and at the same time, again, it seems like you took modern Egypt actually and made it into fantasy more than like uh Arabian Nights even. Like again, I know there's a lot of Arabian Nights flavor, but this just seems so Cairo to me.
Well, and it's another thing that's interesting about layering kind of this Egyptian style setting over a D&D game, or maybe the other way around, laying the D&D game over this Egyptian setting, is the idea of eternity and the idea of immortality. Immortality was real to the ancient Egyptians. The pharaoh, after passing from this world and journeying down the river to, the underworld, through the underworld, and passing the test, which will, allow him to live forever with the gods. I mean, he is immortal. And that was very real for the people at that time. But they couldn't see him anymore. But in D&D, you've got actual immortal creatures. You've got liches who can live for, I think there's a big lich in one of the adventures in this book.
Big lich.
A big important lich.
I wonder what the etymology of lich is. I don't know off the top of my head. Is that a Gygax word? Is that a Celtic word? Let me look up really quick. Please, please keep talking while I look up the
your brain
etymology of lich.
just seizes on things. I don't know where the lich fits in. I think he's in a later adventure. But when you've got creatures that are that old, or for all intents and purposes, immortal, does that whole journey of immortality still figure in the same way as it would in our world? You know,
It looks like it was
it's
Clark Ashton Smith, Lich's Old English for corpse. And Clark Ashton Smith was like in a short story called Empire of the Necromancers,
oh,
used lich as a term for any corpse, animated or inanimate, before it kind of got more specific. But yeah. And then so it goes Clark Ashton Smith and then eventually Gary Gygax. Um, okay, so but I
and you know,
apologize.
and then there's a lot of undead in this series of adventures. So, you know, is that a type of immortality? It's a pretty rough, miserable type of immortality, but you know, if you don't have some adventuring party come along and blow you to powder, you're gonna live for a long
I
time
mean,
being
Jack
undead.
Skellington says that because he is dead, he can take off his head and recite Shakespearean quotations. And that's not a bad life.
So that is interesting. You know, they call this place the Plaza of Eternity. You know, there's a lot in here about, you know, going back, you know, centuries and centuries to previous civilizations whose treasures are buried under the earth. So, you know, that feels very real and very, very similar.
I mean, and you know, Egypt is so wretched with stuff. Um, I one time in the Valley of the Kings, I didn't want to walk around a hill, so I like bribed a guard and I was like, "Can I just walk over the hill? I'll give you 20 pounds." And he's like, "Sure, up you go." So, you know, I'm walking up the hill and I get to the top and I notice the hill is covered in broken pottery shards.
Mm.
Absolutely covered in it because for I don't even know how many centuries, a thousand, I don't recall how long they were burying people in the Valley of the Kings, but the pottery workers would sit up there making their pottery, and if it didn't work out, smash. So,
Oh,
you know, you could just pick some up and put it in your pocket if you wanted to. Um, at the same time, like I went out to the Western Desert at one point, and I was obsessed with the Western Desert because an entire Persian army disappeared into the Western Desert. They were walking out to conquer the Siwa Oasis, and they just never made it. They
huh.
were just eaten by the desert. But it's so dry out there, and they got buried in sand, you know, and it was like 20,000 guys in full Persian armor. Like, you got to be able to find one or two of them eventually, right? Like somebody's
Somebody's
buried
gonna
down there.
uncover those
Yeah.
guys.
Yeah, and it really did evoke this childlike sense of wonder, you know, running around all these ancient Egyptian. Did you go to the Temple of Dendera?
No, he did not.
So the Temple of Dendera is so old that the stone steps have been worn down into ramps.
Oh,
So
oh wow.
you're walking up and down, and again, like on the sides, it's still steps because that's where people don't walk, but the middle is just a ramp going down.
Slide
Like,
on
right?
out.
It's so old, it's so cool. Um,
On the pottery topic, though, when we were at this massive quarry where they would carve out limestone blocks to ship down the Nile for building the temples and things.
but maybe aliens did it.
Okay.
No, I'm just teasing. You know, again, that's one of the amazing things, right? Like you can find the quarry where the stones came from.
Yeah.
Please continue.
No, but I remember as we were, you know, walking around the place and looking at things, there was a shard of pottery on the ground, just like,
Yeah.
you know, laying there. And so our guide picked it up, looked at it, and he said, New Kingdom. And he just flicked it back onto the ground. Like it's not old enough. It's only 1,000 years old. It's not good enough.
I taught in Cairo and I could see the Great Pyramid from my classroom.
Yeah.
And you know, I was like, this is amazing. I'm teaching in Egypt. I can see the Great Pyramid from my classroom. Oh my God. And my teenage students are like, it's just a pile of rocks, you know.
Like nobody we met who actually lives in Cairo, other than our guide, had ever been to the pyramids of Giza. And it's like basically a suburb of Cairo.
It is
And
very expensive for the common people, though, except unless you go on. There are certain days they'll open up and give Egyptian discounts,
oh, I
but
hope
but
so.
it's so expensive because they want to milk the foreigners, right?
Oh, it makes
That
me so
and
sad.
it is, but so I want to say again, 20 years ago when I lived there, there were 2 or 3 days a year where it was much more reasonably priced so actual Egyptians could go. But the rest of can I ask, do you recall how much you paid to get access to the Giza Plateau? Or was it all
It's all we
okay.
just bought into this tour, and
Yeah, I
so
mean, I want to say when I went 20 years ago, it was like 200 Egyptian pounds, which would be like $40, which for us is nothing. But like at the time, there would be Egyptian coworkers who would be like, "Oh my gosh, if I could make it 400 pounds a month in the clear for nothing, I would live like a king."
oh,
Like just which again for us would be like $80. Um,
so same story everywhere.
yeah.
That's yes, well, that is a really good point. Let's talk about the unfinished pyramid of Kagamemni.
Ooh, I want to.
So that's another pyramid here in this Plaza of Eternity. This one, it says that the let's see, we're talking a little bit more about the ghouls. They prefer to hide in their lair, the Pyramid of Kagamemni.
So this is the same adventure, right?
This is the same adventure.
This is where
So
you track the
apparently
ghouls
they have
to?
tracked the
Okay.
ghouls to this pyramid, and it is unfinished. So it says here, the structure was commissioned by one of the last kings of Sokar, who died long before his burial chamber was finished. Rather than further deplete the city's treasury, the city's already bankrupt treasury, Kagamemni's heirs decided to bury their father in a more modest mausoleum. Workers promptly abandoned the grandiose project, and the king was never laid to rest in the pyramid bearing his name chiseled on each cornerstone and over every doorway. So that is a very non-pharaonic kind of take on this. The poor Kagamemni here, he must have been very important to deserve a pyramid at some time, but the idea of not finishing it because we don't have enough money, that does not seem completely like
It certainly doesn't feel Old
idea of
Kingdom.
Egyptian. No.
That feels much more in the fall of the Egyptian Empire era, but
So they do describe what it's like that the unfinished pyramid, basically that it's like a step pyramid that they have not yet smoothed out with the smooth walls and the facade over it to form, the final pyramid. So it's more like the
Pyramid Saqqara.
the pyramid of Saqqara. Yeah, I think I have a picture of that
Yeah, which
somewhere. It's more like this guy. And what is super interesting is when you look
for
at
podcasters, again, it's a pyramid that looks like it's going to consist of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 individual layers. And again, instead of looking smooth like you'd expect, it looks like rectangle upon rectangle upon rectangle, a stack of rectangles.
What you might have called a ziggurat.
Yeah, looks which I think, no, never mind. I'm not going to get into most of this. Sorry.
But again, like prototype pyramid.
Yeah.
So in ancient Egypt, this was like how they learned how to make a pyramid that actually, resembles what we see at Giza. But what I thought was really super cool is that here on the map sheet for this pyramid of Kagamemni, everything is under the pyramid. It is, you if you've gone to Egypt or you have friends, they probably talked about going into the Great Pyramid and, going right into the depths of the pyramid and finding the burial chamber. But that's not how it was in these earlier pyramids. The pyramid was just like a big cairn over the tomb. And the tomb complex was underneath. And so
It's funny, that's the thing I haven't thought about before.
This map is actually pretty accurate as far as like what I know about,
That's really cool.
Those kind of step pyramids.
So can I ask you what the process of editing on this was like? If you recall. This came out in
like the mid 90s, probably 94. Or wait, what are we
1994.
94. Well, what do I remember? I remember,
Or just what editing was like when you're working on a game product.
well, this game product had a number of different components. And my first book that I did was the Complete Book of Druids. And that was just one big book. And so it was not hard to keep
Mm.
track of things. But this adventure source box, I mean, this was back in the days like you hear about where TSR wasn't really counting its pennies the way maybe it could have been. And as you look at, if you look through a copy of one of these source boxes, you see that there's a metallic ink used for on every page
Which is
of all
pretty
the
cool.
booklets. It's super cool. It's gold and it makes the book feel so rich, even though the rest of it is black and white. Well, that metallic ink is not cheap. And to be able to deliver a book with a product with a box, two booklets, one of which has a nice cover, six card sheets, double-sided, and a poster map, and another little monster book. There was like an little MC compendium appendix dealie in here. I mean, this is an expensive product, and in 1994, they were selling it for not nearly enough, I imagine. $18 US.
$18 US.
I saw that one of these on eBay earlier today for $120. So
I would bet $30 today, you think? If you're gonna translate $18 then into 2024 money, I'd go $30.
that would not cover you. That would
Oh,
not,
yeah.
that wouldn't cover all the cost of this. So, you know, the booklets aren't terribly long. There's one that's 32 and one that's 64, and then 8 pages of MC and 6 double-sided card sheets. So, you know, it's the equivalent of about 100 and some page book. You know, how much are you going to pay for 100 and some page book from TSR, from Wizards, or from another publisher right now?
100 pages, I'm gonna say 40, 50.
Yeah, I would say. So one of the things that you have to take into consideration is just keeping everything straight. You know, don't assume that the players or the DM will automatically know which card sheet goes with which adventure. So clearly labeling the card sheets, card 5, card 4, and then specifically saying in the adventure, now look at the back of card 4, you know, having, you know, that's really important because there's, you know, just like now, the DM doesn't have a lot of time to prepare necessarily. So being able to keep that juggling act, I think that's important and kind of fun.
So I will say, I have heard an awful lot of stories about how the fifth edition team would get work from freelancers and just be appalled and tell me these stories about like putting all of this work in to fix what they think is substandard freelancer work. I talk to the freelancers and they're like, you know, I turned in my work and it was then ruined and marred in editing. So it's interesting that's definitely going to be one of the stories of fifth edition is this war over the text between the writers and the editors. And ultimately the editors won the war because they didn't even go back to the writers and ask for revisions sometimes. They just like made huge changes. So you said the writer would only hear from the editor if there was a big problem.
That is my memory about working with freelance designers. Now, if you're working with an in-house designer, it's very different. And I do remember working on the Complete Book of Druids and talking with a designer, and there wasn't a big problem. There were just some questions. And it was a great relationship. I don't remember any kind of back and forth with Steve. I think clearly the company had made an investment in Steve Kurtz because he worked on many Al-Qadim products, like the majority of the Al-Qadim line. In fact, a number of these source box types were Steve's. So I think that I don't know him. I'm supposing that he had stature with the company, having had, you know, previous great, you know, reviews from his other work, because this was a significant part of his own bibliography.
Well, and just, pardon me, just dipping into this product, the creativity and research and unique voice just jumps right out.
Very unique voice. The storytelling of the Arabian Nights comes through. There's an introductory quote from the Arabian Nights
I saw.
in every, starting out every chapter. There's an Afridi who, has his own secret motivations, but is, laying it on thick for the DM as kind of painting a picture of the setting. So yeah, that is unusual.
Well, we're running a little short on time, so let me ask you this. My understanding is that you are opening for editing work now. Is that correct?
Yeah, I have been for the last year back in the swing of it, working on editing for Schwab Entertainment. So if you are familiar with the Shadow of the Weird Wizard product line, some great stuff there. Also doing some work for Cobalt Press and for Wizards, both of which are, going to see bookstore shelves next year.
So I'll ask you this loaded question. So did you find the freelance work from Wizards? Did you find that to be substandard and just requiring a bunch of fixes?
I I found a lot of talent out there, just
Okay.
like I found when I was in my first chapter of work in the game industry. There's a lot of great talent. There's also, depending on the company, there are different amounts of resources that they have to, pull things together. So my role as an editor is very different depending on what company I happen to be working for.
Well, and I would tell you again, I'm still doing research on this. I'm still talking to people, but I have a very strong feeling that what happened when I hear the stories is it's actually a problem of scarcity culture. And there's a feeling of there's only so many people that are going to get to work on D&D at Wizards. And is this creative up and comer going to be my competition? If they do a good job, are they going to get hired in here? Are they going to be my replacement? Am I really going to make D&D my career? Because again, the layoffs were so endemic at Wizards for so long. And people talk to me about how they didn't feel like, oh, this great new voice I'm excited to work with. It was, oh God, what if they're better than me?
Oh.
And this very Machiavellian culture that was then encouraged by that. So because I'm guessing nobody's afraid you're going to move to Seattle and start running D&D, maybe you're a safer person or use
Well,
a
there's
different
a
lens.
huge difference when you're talking about editors versus designers. Back when I was with Wizards of the Coast, so we're talking again, late 90s, early 2000s, people would take jobs as editors, not because they wanted to edit, but because they wanted to, move into game design. And this was the only job that was available. And so I think that the kind of culture you are describing, I would be surprised if it was as prevalent with editors as it is with perhaps writers. But still, it makes me sad to hear that kind of experience, because it's just another example of how no matter how fabulous game design is and how wonderful the subject matter is, you get to work on D&D. When all said and done, it's still a company that needs to turn a profit. It's still a job, and not, there's no fantasy job.
That is true. Teaching is really good, though. I recommend it. So if people were interested in hiring you as an editor, how would they contact you?
Oh, well, I have my own company now called Fine Line LLC, and you can look me up online at SueWeinlein.com. You can find out a little bit about what I do, not just in the game industry, but I also am available to edit for corporate work, if that kind of thing is something you may need. Appreciate you mentioning it.
Hey, my pleasure. So, well, Sue, I can't thank you enough for having me over and inviting me in and giving me a glass for water.
I'm just so extravagant.
All right. And
it's been fun to tour around Zakara with you.
thank you so much. Listeners, if you are not yet a Patreon subscriber, please come and subscribe to our Patreon. It's only $3 a month. You get access to a Discord server. We give you special Patreon-only episodes. I'm going to give you some sneak peeks at my second volume of D&D history. So if you're interested in that, it's only $3 a month. My current plan is to only ever have one Patreon level and just make it so good that everyone subscribes at $3 a month. That is my plan. I'm going to keep working on that to try and make it better and better and better. But I know other people are like, where's your big fish? Go find your big fish. You're going to have a $100 a month level and you're going to, send them gold toilet brushes every month or whatever it is. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to make this lowest level so good.
Every man's Patreon.
Every man's I hope so. Anyway, Sue, thank you so much. Listeners, thank you so much. Be well all.